Hello and welcome to Code Red's first webinar, Dyslexia Myths and Facts with Lyn Stone. Thank you very much, Lyn, for giving us your time and expertise. Thank you also to Microsoft for supporting us in hosting this webinar. We are very grateful for all you have done to support Code Red with these webinars and during Dyslexia Awareness Month. We're so happy to see so many of you register for this webinar. Please remember to sign up to Code Red for future updates on future events. Code Red's vision is for all people with dyslexia to be understood, acknowledged, empowered, and to have equal access to opportunity. We recently released the Read My Frustration campaign, which aims to raise awareness of the prevalence of dyslexia in Australia and draw attention to the unnecessary pain and frustration caused by unrecognised dyslexia. We know early identification, reading instruction informed by science, and supportive classroom environments would allow all dyslexics to achieve their potential. Please take a quick look at our 30-second clip and then we'll get started with the webinar.
Look closer. Try to read it, please. See? They're laughing at us. They'll say show them you can read. Please! I can't. I just...
Sam, give it a try. Let's see how you go.
1 in 10 Australians struggle with the frustration of dyslexia every day, and it often goes unread. To find out more about dyslexia, go to coderednetwork.org.
Today I'm going to talk a little bit about dyslexia myths and facts. I'm a linguist in private practice, which means that I've gone to university and I've studied the structure of language, and I went straight into a clinic and started working with children and adults who found it difficult to read and write, and lots of them were dyslexic. I'm also a school consultant. That sort of evolved over time, where the students that come to me when they're struggling, sometimes I have to have conversations with the schools that they're at, and that sort of evolved into another field of consultancy. Schools have come back and said, well, can you tell us more about that? And that in itself has become something else I'm involved in. I'm also an industry advisory board member at the Graduate School of Health at the University of Technology in Sydney, and I write books as well. So I'm an author, and I write on literacy, language, spelling, reading and writing, and that sort of thing. I think it's probably best to start with the definition of dyslexia, and I'm not saying that you don't know the definition of dyslexia, otherwise I doubt you'd be here listening to this, but I think it's a good idea in terms of advocacy to be really clear on what we mean when we talk about dyslexia. So going into the etymology, of course, and into the morphology of the word, dys means bad or difficult or abnormal. Other words that are related to dys or have that dys element in them are dysfunctional, dystopia and dystrophy. If you add lex to that, the base lex, that very basically means word. So we have things like lexicon, lexicography, and even legislation. It's from the same root. Literally then, dyslexia means word problems. There are warning signs for dyslexia, and for educators and parents, it's a good idea to have a conceptual understanding of what that is. In terms of getting a diagnosis for dyslexia, here in Australia, that happens when you go to see a psychological professional. So registered psychologists are the only people in Australia currently who can diagnose dyslexia. What they will say after giving a child or an adult a battery of tests to diagnose dyslexia is that they will be looking for a persistent difficulty in learning or academic skills for at least 6 months despite intervention. So they're looking for a persistent difficulty even when the child is getting help. That then helps to differentiate dyslexia from perhaps other things that might be impeding the academic progress of the child. It can be characterized by things like inaccurate and slow reading, and that's something that is that's tested for when you go for a dyslexia diagnosis. It can be boiled down to difficulty with decoding, and decoding is basically getting words off the page, going through each letter one by one and and pronouncing the word and attaching that to a word in your lexicon. That's decoding. If you have difficulty with that, or if a child has difficulty with that, that's a possible warning sign for dyslexia. Also, though, this can lead to difficulty with comprehension of text, so that's also assessed, and difficulty with spelling. That's the other thing. Dyslexia isn't just about reading, and we will talk about that a little bit more as we go through. Also, though, things like grammar, punctuation, and other writing skills need to be assessed to look through, or to give an accurate diagnosis for dyslexia. So all of these things need to be looked at. All of these things are warning signs. However, there are other factors that contribute to low progress in reading. So this is something else that a psychological professional has to look into in order to make the diagnosis. And that's why you do have to go to someone who's really well qualified. And Code Red, of course, can point you in the right direction for that. So factors contributing to low progress reading will be certain things. There will be things like intellectual disabilities. They can also contribute to low progress in reading. It's not necessarily dyslexia. Ruling out the ability to hear, whether that's causing low progress in reading, is a really good idea. So a hearing test is a good starting point as well. Also, you've got to test vision. And I don't mean a behavioural optometrist testing colour reactions and that sort of thing. I'm talking about your normal vision testing that you can get in the high street. Is the child short-sighted, long-sighted? Do they have astigmatism? That sort of thing, rather than anything else that we're going to go into later in the snake oil part. So can they see and can they hear within normal limits? Those things need to be ruled out. Also, mental health problems can impact on progress in reading, and that too has to be assessed when you're looking at a dyslexia diagnosis. The other thing that contributes to low progress in reading is inadequate instruction. And the other thing that we do at Code Red is we try to advocate for higher quality instruction for everyone. And again, we'll touch on that as we go through. There is also some debate about whether to use or not to use the term dyslexia. The meaning of dyslexia becomes a bit diluted if all children are given that label. And it's a bad idea to form a diagnosis on the basis of low reading progress alone. So problems arise when that label is given to all children. Reading difficulties are only a possible sign of dyslexia. Therefore, there are professionals in the field, and you will get psychological professionals who will say things like reading difficulties or reading disability or reading impairment rather than dyslexia. And that's all acceptable as long as that's well explained to you when you have a dyslexia or when you go for some form of diagnosis to explain low progress in reading. In my view, the term dyslexia is still useful for the following reasons. Those who fall within that spectrum of symptoms have a name for their difficulties. I think that's really important. It's often a relief as well. It's often a relief to people when reading and spelling are commonly used to judge intelligence. So it's a relief to have a name for their low progress. Coming back to dyslexia and reading, dyslexia is not isolated to reading. So we do have to keep in mind that dyslexia, even when a child learns to read and does it fluently with comprehension, that's not like the dyslexia has gone away. The ability to spell and write and pronounce words is also impaired. And I think that's really useful then to have that dyslexia label to show that, yes, I can read, but my spelling may be below standard because of the dyslexia. Many countries now have dyslexia associations to help advise and guide parents, and therefore it's a good idea to keep the label as well because it's searchable, it's identifiable, and it's succinct. It has a name that doesn't mean lazy or dumb, and the internal dialogue of many children who find that their progress in reading and writing is slow often have an internal dialogue that suggests that they're lazy or dumb, and sometimes even within teaching systems there's a suggestion that children struggling with reading and writing progress are lazy or dumb. So dyslexia actually is a very helpful term once it's diagnosed to explain somebody's low progress. This growing advocacy movement, of course, is growing really fast. It's a really good grassroots movement. We've had 3 major inquiries into the teaching of reading in 3 major countries. We've had Australia, we've had the UK, and we've had the US. And these are government inquiries that have all concluded that what you do is you teach children systematically the relationships between sounds and symbols, and that's going to help everyone. We've had legislation in these 3 countries, and we've had inquiries, and yet not much has changed in the educational sphere. The advocacy movement, like Code Red Dyslexia Network, is the actual movement that is changing things for dyslexics. And so again, that's what makes this term still very, very useful. Let's go on with some myths and facts though. The first thing about dyslexia, well, it's neurological. What it means is it originates in the brain. It originates in brain structures. It's not the eyes, it's not the ears, it's not the reflexes, and it's not the digestive system that causes dyslexia. We've seen all sorts of claims, such as excessive screen time, a poor diet, a low IQ, phonics. I've seen people blame phonics for dyslexia. Not being read to as an infant, which is probably one of the most insulting things that you can say to a family within which there is dyslexia. So many advocates, especially in the Code Red network, are huge readers, read to their children in utero. It's such an insulting thing to say that dyslexia is caused by not being read to as an infant. And reading to someone is really nice, but actually that doesn't teach a person to read. Also, dyslexia is not a problem with the eyes. I can't stress this enough. It's neurological. It is in the structures of the brain. It is not in the organ that is the eyes. Therefore, treating all of these things, you know, reducing screen time, changing the diet, blaming intelligence, blaming phonics, blaming the parents, or doing things to ameliorate the, you know, the environment, the visual environment that a child is in, will not do anything for dyslexia. So it originates in the brain. The other thing about dyslexia is that it's developmental. That means it's chronic. It starts in childhood and it goes through the person's life. It's developmental in that it affects one or more of the major life functions, and interacting with print in this modern society is a major life function. It's not going to just go away. That's the other thing about it. Even with really good quality intervention, with really good quality tier 1 in the classroom instruction, it doesn't just go away. It's not going to be outgrown. And many people in this network have had that kind of dialogue with educators where they've said, just wait, they might outgrow their difficulties. That doesn't happen with a developmental disorder. A developmental disorder also is something that is not a disease. It's not there to be cured. It can certainly be helped. Its effects can be lessened, and they are through early intervention and high quality intervention. So early diagnosis, high quality intervention, that's going to help with any developmental disorder, including dyslexia. Here's another thing about dyslexia. It is not a poverty problem. It is not a class problem. It is pervasive. It can affect anyone from any background. There isn't a demographic that is more prone. What we see, though, is that some people get better support. So the more money, the more social capital a person has, the more likely they are to be supported through dyslexia, which can look like dyslexia is a poverty issue. Addressing dyslexia definitely is a poverty issue, but it's not poverty that causes dyslexia. This didn't always used to be the case. Even people from very wealthy backgrounds were not recognized as dyslexic. Who do you think said this? Whose quote is this, do you reckon? I'll read that out to you. My dyslexia was never treated as a handicap. My teachers thought I was lazy and dumb and I couldn't keep up or fit in. And this is someone who went to a private boarding school, whose parents were well off, who had a very strong work ethic. I bet you can guess who it is. Yeah, it's Richard Branson. So back in his day, and this is why he gets involved with dyslexia advocacy, he was just told that he was done. There is no way he could possibly have something. It was getting in the way. It was all to do with his attitude and with his work ethic, which I think he proved probably wasn't the case. The other thing about dyslexia, and one of the good things about it, is that it's treatable. You can help people. You can totally help people with dyslexia. It's not a dead end by any means. It all hinges on early, high quality instruction. And according to those inquiries that I listed earlier, well delivered, systematic, synthetic phonics instruction is a dyslexic's best bet. And guess what? It's everyone's best bet. It's actually quite a good way to run novices through the writing system. Early screening and diagnosis and expert intervention has to be available for everyone who needs support to keep making progress. What we can do right here, right now, is advocate for reasonable classroom accommodations, both in primary and in high school. And I'll look through some of those accommodations towards the end. Here's another thing about dyslexia. It exists. Now look, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't have to tell you that, but there are many people who've experienced, educators, for instance, people in their children's lives who have said, dyslexia is not actually a thing. It's not a thing. In fact, there are some very high profile authors who have said that dyslexia is a trendy label that's made up to mask parents being lazy about their children, parents not taking the time to read to their children, to mask that parents are giving their children excessive screen time. Answers on a postcard if you can think of who that author is. Dyslexia actually needs to be acknowledged and diagnosed and assisted. It is not something somebody deliberately does. Low progress in reading and writing is not something a child does deliberately to annoy the adults around them. Here's the other thing about this condition that exists. Faddish remedies and cures are not going to help. And in fact, over time, they cost more than expert intervention, because what they cost, as well as money, they cost opportunity. And opportunity cost is a lifelong debt for a child. The window is quite small to get a child to build the brain structures needed to be fully literate. It's a fairly small window. So if people are trying this and trying that, that's called an opportunity cost. You need to teach them how the writing system works and give them lots of practice. So avoidance of literacy tasks is not the answer. If you're having trouble reading and writing, the way you overcome that is to read and write, and to have someone guide you, an expert to guide you. And that's again why we advocate for high quality teacher training, not low quality teacher training that doesn't acknowledge that dyslexia exists. One of the, I think, the most pervasive myths about dyslexia, and this may come as a bit of a shock to you, and I'm sorry, please don't shoot the messenger, but one of the most common myths is that dyslexia is somehow a gift. And I disagree. I strongly disagree with that. Dyslexia is not a gift. I have a 17-year-old daughter who is dyslexic. Her name's Sasha. And she says, my strengths are my own and not the result of dyslexia. She has lots of strengths, just like all our children have. And it wasn't dyslexia that caused any of them. And don't get me started on resilience. Would you deliberately choose dyslexia? A part of the dyslexic experience, according to the feedback that we get from hundreds and thousands of families, is that humiliation and frustration and misunderstanding and struggle is part of the picture. That's not a gift. That is not a gift. We hear a lot about dyslexics being out-of-the-box thinkers, or good at design, or more creative. That is a dangerous expectation to place on children who are not. out-of-the-box thinkers or good at design or more creative but who are still dyslexic. There is absolutely no evidence that dyslexics are out-of-the-box thinkers or good at design or any of these other things. It basically means they struggle with print. That's what dyslexia is. So here's a better way to frame this. And I like saying this to my dyslexic students, and I've said this to my daughter. You might need to work quite hard to learn to read and write fast, but it's not impossible, and we're going to give you all the help you need. Luckily, you have lots of, and then you insert their positive traits because that's what they have, that's theirs. You have lots of to help you out with that. That is a better way to frame what's going on with this condition. Another question I see a lot on social media, and I get asked a lot, is do dyslexics require special education? Should we take them out of the mainstream classroom and give them a different thing from what they're getting in the mainstream classroom? Well, the answer is no. Dyslexic or not, the path to fluent reading and writing follows much the same trajectory from human to human. To teach someone to read and write, they have to have phonological awareness, phonic knowledge, that is knowledge of the correspondences between sounds and symbols. They need to build reading fluency. They need to have an adequate vocabulary, and taking children out and working with them without giving them access to the curriculum is not a vocabulary building thing, which is a very, very good argument for extremely high quality classroom teaching from the outset. And also children need to build all of that to comprehension of what they read. The stages on the path to fluent reading and writing are complex, and they vary in length, but their order is the same. It is nothing different for dyslexic children. Accommodations, though, they can be helpful. And we'll talk about some accommodations now. Here's some reasonable adjustments for reading that can be made in schools, primary and high schools, right now. The first thing is only ask the student to read aloud if they're comfortable with that. So many students who come to see me tell me things about what's working for them in schools. And one of the main things that I hear from students is that they dread being asked to read anything out loud, even all the way up to high school. It does not, it doesn't enhance their experience. It doesn't make them better at reading out loud. All it does is increase their anxiety. If you want to decrease their anxiety, teach them to read and write well, and then they'll be more inclined to read out loud. But forcing them to read aloud is a really horrible thing to do, and very anxiety forming for lots and lots of dyslexic students. The other thing is allowing the use of audiobooks should be standard practice. Listening to a book is as good as reading a book in many ways, especially if we're building vocabulary and accessing the curriculum. And we have the technology for audiobooks. We should use them. Also, allowing the use of assistive technology is a reasonable adjustment. It is not cheating, and it is not because somebody's not intelligent. And again, we have a lot of really good assistive technology out there. It's a good thing for schools to start to discover all of that and work with students to maximize their potential, to maximize their reach towards the curriculum. Here's some reasonable adjustments for comprehension. We should, wherever possible, allow verbal comprehension assessment. So rather than a student doing written answers, speaking out loud and answering that they've understood the topic that you're teaching is a reasonable adjustment. It's a reasonable adjustment for comprehension. Also, though, providing outlines and summaries, and like this here, vocabulary words and previews and so on. As you can see, this relates to biology. Creating word lists and having them pre-taught and learned, such a good idea to help a child comprehend the subject at hand. Spelling is such a difficult thing for a dyslexic, even after they've overcome reading, even after they've overcome syntax, comprehension, everything else that goes into it. Spelling is the last thing that gets remediated, and sometimes under pressure, spelling will be the first thing to break down. So if you're in an exam, for instance, and you've learned all your stuff and you're dyslexic, the first thing that you're going to make a mistake on is spelling. It's really, really hard for dyslexics. And again, that's where assistive technology can be so useful. Also, teaching the rules and structure of the English language is really, really important for dyslexics. And actually, it's important for everyone. It's an interesting field too. It should be part of the curriculum. Helping to compile keyword lists again for spelling and learning how to spell those keyword lists and words in their families is so important for dyslexic kids. Not just spelling though, putting your ideas onto the page also needs to be reasonably adjusted. Right now we live in an environment, especially in primary school, where children are put into a kind of dark room maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and asked to cold write pages of persuasive texts or narratives or whatever genre is being focused on. And that's absolutely just a terrible idea for dyslexic children, as well as for most other children. Reasonable adjustments should be allowing the use of assistive technology, allowing extra time to complete writing tasks, adjusting expectations of volume. So there's an awful lot of emphasis on quantity, where actually quality is much, much more important. Avoiding copying from the board wherever possible, and also giving opportunities to express knowledge verbally. But the last thing, and the most important thing that I'm going to list here under reasonable adjustments for writing, is giving scaffolds and writing frames, and not taking them away until a child is ready to not use them. And that's a personal decision. There is no reason to not give scaffolds. There is no reason to take them away at any time. I know during NAPLAN, scaffolds are not allowed, but every single other opportunity to write should be heavily scaffolded until the child themselves decides that they don't want that scaffolding. I just don't see the point of cold writes at all. It's a form of assessment that creates Matthew effects, that creates the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. The other thing in a lot of the profile of dyslexic people is that they have trouble being organized. This can happen to some dyslexic children. There's a sort of executive function thing happening there. And so we can do reasonable adjustments for organization as well. Things like breaking tasks, large tasks, into smaller steps helps everyone, including dyslexics. Making instructions short and clear. Using visual aids, not visual aids that take attention off the subject being learned, because then you have something called the split attention effect, but using things like charts and visual aids to help people know what they need to do next, what's coming up, and so on. Where appropriate, a peer helper can also make a difference to adjust for organization with a dyslexic child. It's time for history. Get out your history book, you know, very, very simple like that. Of course, we never ever want to have children become overly reliant on another peer, because then what happens there is that if they want to separate from that peer for other reasons, they can't. And so they start forming relationships that are not as healthy as they could be. So where appropriate, a peer helper can make a difference. In summary, and you will get this slides for this presentation. In summary, I've made a chart, what dyslexia is and what it's not. So to summarize, it's neurological, developmental, pervasive, treatable, real. It's a difficulty with words, not anything else. It's unpleasant, but it is responsive. And that's the really important part. It is responsive to skill teaching in the 5 pillars of literacy. What dyslexia is not is caused by external factors, something that will go away, something to do with the home. It's nothing to do with the home. It's not curable through diet, etc. It's not imaginary, and it's got nothing to do with people reversing letters or letters swimming around on a page or anything to do with hearing or vision. It's certainly not a gift, and it doesn't need special, different, new education. It just needs really high quality education, and that's ultimately what we're advocating for. So who else can help? Well, Code Red Dyslexia Network sure can, so I'm glad you're here. Also, Dyslexia Support Australia, that's a Facebook page. They're moderated by some extremely well-informed moderators. But with Dyslexia Support Australia, not only will you get evidence-based advice and support, but you will also get a space where the snake oil, where the nonsense about dyslexia is stringently kept out. Dyslexia Support Australia will also give you the best information about dysgraphia. It's another neurological condition that is quite heavily underdiagnosed and definitely needs to be looked at when children are having trouble writing, especially. Speech language professionals can also be very helpful in this space. And we like to advocate, or I certainly like to advocate, for speech language professionals to have lots of ties with schools. There are some schools now that actually employ full-time speech language professionals just to service their schools. That's a really good idea, because these people come from a science background, not a philosophy background, which can sometimes get in the way of providing high quality instruction. Educational psychologists, of course, are the people that form the diagnosis. They're very important to have around, and they can help. And specialist tutors, not just your run-of-the-mill, you know, those boiler rooms that you put children in, where they go and sit in front of a computer with a, you know, a headset on and do a lesson, and there's 10 of them in the room, this franchise. That is not specialist tuition. Dyslexic children and adults benefit from tutors who understand dyslexia. They don't necessarily need to be teachers, they can be linguists as well, but they have to have an understanding of dyslexia. Who can't help? Well, first of all, anyone talking about brain training and neurodiversity and want to tackle the brain and do things with the brain rather than teaching how the writing system works systematically and allowing for practice, avoid. Also, anybody who is trying to sell coloured lenses or overlays. Dyslexia is nothing to do with the eyes. You can definitely be affected by too much glare in your environment, but that's aside. That's aside from dyslexia. If you have sensitivity to light and so on, that is not dyslexia. You might just have that and dyslexia, but one does not cause the other. And fixing environmental light will not have any effect on dyslexia. The dyslexia is still there. You have to teach the writing system. That's where the money's got to go. That's where the practice and time has got to go. Behavioural optometrists, therefore, are not useful in this space whatsoever. It is nothing to do with optometry. Same with listening therapy merchants. It's nothing to do with your ears. It's nothing to do with your ears. It's nothing to do with your kneecaps. It's nothing to do with your knuckles. Now, those last two examples you'd laugh at, right? Dyslexia's got nothing to do with your knuckles, got nothing to do with your kneecaps, nor your ears or eyes. They may be the sensory organs that take in sound and vision, but the brain, that part of the brain that processes print, or those parts of the brain that processes print, they need to be addressed via showing how print relates to sound and sound relates to print. So listening therapy doesn't do that. Same with kinesiologists, bless them, and chiropractors. This does not have an effect on dyslexia. I'll say it again, learning the writing system, how that works, and practicing that has more effect than all of these put together. That's where your money should go. That's where the effort needs to go. There are some people in the field called reading recovery teachers, and again, they are not dyslexics' friends. Unfortunately, the reading recovery philosophy has a lot to do with training children to guess rather than learn how the writing system works. Avoid. Lastly, dietitians can't help you. It's great to have a healthy diet, and if you feel that the child's diet isn't very good and you consult a dietitian, that's going to have an overall health effect. It's not going to get to the underlying cause, the underlying problem. The underlying problem is with print. And that's why, again, from an advocacy's perspective, we have to demand a better rate of children reading. Every child in a mainstream school can learn to read, yet there are many schools, most schools, you should ask your school, where they say we have an 80% success rate. Actually, an 80% success rate, that is 80% of the children that leave our school are able to read and write. If you flip that on its head, that's actually a 20% failure rate. We can do a lot better than that. And again, guess what it comes down to? Yep, that's right. High quality early instruction, high quality early intervention, diagnosis, assessment.
A boy rides a scooter.
The fact that over the summer, a child can go from basically nothing to having the world at their fingertips and being able to read and being willing to try, it's more than a miracle. I think it's more than anybody can expect.
Microsoft plus accessibility. The boy enters a home.
Even in kindergarten, Anjay was incredibly bright, but he couldn't read. The difficulty reading continued to second grade. Shortly after Anjay was diagnosed with dyslexia, a friend of mine said she saw something online about a tool from Microsoft for kids with dyslexia. I made an appointment at our local Microsoft store. We went in, they downloaded learning tools, asked Anjay to sit down, and my son read. It was amazing.
Anjay reads from a computer.
Anjay, in that moment, conquered this fear and realized that he could access something that had been inaccessible to him. I saw my little boy read and knew that here was an answer, that here was something that could change his life. Microsoft Learning Tools has been a miracle in our lives. He could get everything in the same font. He was able to lengthen his spaces between words, and that was amazing and so simple. Anjay's been happier, more confident. He was living his life where the written word was an enemy, and now it's a thing to be conquered.
Microsoft. Microsoft.com/accessibility.
Hi, my name's Troy. I'm a learning delivery specialist and the accessibility lead for Microsoft Australia Education. I have the really fun job of going from school to school and helping them understand all the great things they can do with technology to give those kids that need that little bit of extra help, a little bit of extra help. We know that about 50% of instructional time can be lost by teachers needing to meet those additional learning needs. And we also know that it's about 100% of schools that have kids in their programs that need that extra support. We also know that about 30% of students in New South Wales come from a background where the language at home is other than English. So when it comes to our technologies, we want to help students build a foundation for future success. So we know that kids really would rather miss out than stand out. So we want to make sure that the technology is there in a sort of a hidden way, in a way that can help them get the support without them standing out to their peers or the people around them. So in other words, our technology is all about building independence, but also the reduction of stigma. We also want to build institutions that have a really good reputation around inclusivity and equity. So as they open up these technologies to their students, the community sees that they're actually doing their best to build these inclusive environments. The other thing that we want to make sure is that technology isn't a burden to the teacher. We want to make sure that the technology is something that's really helpful to the teacher and helps them to engage every learner. There's a lot of tools in the Microsoft education accessibility space, but what sits at the top is probably Immersive Reader. It was designed originally to target dyslexia, but it's grown and developed where it's just helping kids from all different needs and all different walks of life. So the scenario we have here is a piece of text that, let's say, a Year 7 girl is struggling with. Maybe she's challenged by low vision, or maybe it's dyslexia or something like that. But what happens for her is when she comes to this piece of text, she's largely locked out, or at least locked out to keeping up with the rest of the girls in her class. So what she can do instead is she can actually click here on Immersive Reader. And then we see Immersive Reader opens up as a whole screen application. But the cool thing about it is it's taken away all the bells and whistles from the app. So all those distractions, all those colors, they're all gone. And she can make changes to this document inside the actual document. So she's not having to go out to a browser settings or a PC settings. This can all happen inside the actual document. And you can see here that when she clicks on text preferences, she can increase and decrease her text size, and she can also increase the spacing. And the spacing there is increased between the letters, between the lines, and between the words. And we know that's really important when it comes to something like dyslexia. So that spacing can be accentuated even further by increasing the text size again. She has the ability to change her font. She also has the ability to change her theme. So she can throw that into dark mode or something that's really nice for her eyes. But where it gets really cool is when she hits play.
The Pacific Northwest tree octopus, Octopus paxivolis, can be found in the temperate rainforests of the Olympic Peninsula on the west coast of North America.
Now you notice in there the ability for that to actually read with an Aussie accent. So it's actually reading the language pack on her machine or reading the browser and coming through with an Aussie accent. So you can change that accent if you want. We also have the ability to break words into syllables. Now that imitates the way that a teacher would teach a child to read, to break a word down into syllables, and it's what we call chunking. So instead of having the aide sitting there doing that with the student, the technology is going to pick that up for her. She can highlight the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives, the adverbs, and she can change the colours there as well if she has trouble distinguishing colours. And if she's really stuck with colours, she has the ability to click on the Show Labels button and it'll show those there. Now, the cool thing about this is the AI is really powerful here and it's actually contextualising those words. So instead of just looking at a word, say like tag, and reading it as a verb, it'll look at it and say, are we going to play tag? And it'll throw it in as a noun. Very, very cool. The other thing that's nice is the line focus. So that reduction of distraction even further is right there. And now when we hit play.
Their habitat lies on the eastern side of the Olympic mountain range, adjacent to Hood Canal.
You can see it's reduced that. And of course, let me not forget, the ability to speed it up and slow it down, of course, is there. The other thing that we've got is what's called the picture dictionary. And this is powered by Boardmaker. So if anyone knows Boardmaker as a tool, you know it's really, really good. When I click on some of these words now, I'm going to get a picture dictionary that's going to pop up and give me prompts.
Out of every book that you could possibly read, I'm going to recommend one just for your journey along the dyslexia path. It's Making Sense of Interventions for Children with Developmental Disorders by Caroline Bowen and Pam Snow. This is the ultimate Bible in knowing the good and the bad in this field. So what this does is it goes through lots of different developmental disorders such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, and it lists out all of the different interventions that are on the market and gives a very, very well written, very understandable reason why or why not they should be avoided. So this, again, it's absolutely essential reading for anybody that's on this dyslexia journey. This is how to stay in touch with me. I'm truly honoured that you would come and listen to me at all. I'm wishing you all the best of luck. It's a long journey with dyslexia. It's a lifelong journey, but I'm glad you're here. It was a great honour to talk to you today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you Code Red Dyslexia Network for giving me this opportunity. Thank you also, Troy, for facilitating this. Could not have done it without you.
Look closer. Try to read it, please. See? They're laughing at us. They'll say show them you can read. Please. I can't. I just...
Sam, give it a try. Let's see how you go.
1 in 10 Australians struggle with the frustration of dyslexia every day, and it often goes unread. To find out more about dyslexia, go to coderednetwork.org.